IVM.
Welcome to another week on IVM. It's been a great week, and if you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. On Geek Fruit this week, Tejas and Dinkar discuss their favorite movie soundtracks. On The Seen and the Unseen, Amit Verma talks to researcher and activist Amit Chandra, and they dissect India's education sector. On Cyrus Says, we have writer and director Anand Sivakumaran, who's hosting a great new show for us called Croc Tales as well. Anand and Cyrus talk about how Anand journeyed from an engineer to a full-time writer. On Simplified, Naren, Chuck, and Shriketh go to the root of the word assassin and twisted an interesting history behind it. This week on Shunyan, we're joined by Sanjay Nath, who is a co-founder and managing partner at Bloom Ventures. We have a really interesting conversation about investing. On Marbles Lost and Found, Zain and Avanti talk to psychotherapist Alishiyah Halaney. And also this week marks the 50th episode of the Pragati podcast. Hosts Hamsini Hariharan and Pawan Srinath sit down to talk about the long, strange trip it's been and also round up some of the recent news. And with that, I'm going to take you on to your shows.
To all of our listeners tuning in, we'll be delving into issues like suicide and sexual abuse. If you feel that you'll be affected, please tune out now. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Marbles Lost and Found, the show where we're talking about things to do with mental health, because we just want to get people to talk about things because it's okay to do so. I'm Zain.
And I'm Avanti. And today, actually, we have a special guest on board. We have Alishiyah Halaney. She's a practicing psychotherapist here in Bombay. And before she moved to Bombay, she was a practicing psychotherapist in America. And she worked with foster kids and adopted kids, and now has a huge sort of repertoire of work. So hi, Alishiyah.
Hi.
We've brought Alishiyah on board today because we're going to talk about myth busting.
Yes, exactly. In fact, I'm really, really happy that we're doing this episode because there are quite a few things, in fact, that I am unfamiliar with. So this will actually be very educational for me as well. Because there are quite a lot of misconceptions out there, especially to do with mental health. So, Avanti, would you like to kick things off? I'd say since you're a therapist yourself, you have a lot more knowledge in this than I am. I'd rather let you kind of take the reins on this.
Yeah. Do you want to start with addressing split personality?
Okay.
Which actually could be bipolar or schizophrenia in our common. I don't know if you've heard.
Yeah. Like you say someone's schizophrenic.
This was split personality.
Yeah, exactly. So what does that even mean? And does that even have any bearing whatsoever?
So first it was referred to as split personality, then it was multiple personality disorder, MBD, and now the more updated and correct term is DID, which is Dissociative Identity Disorder.
Right.
And so it's like different cognitive and emotional states depending on the kind of situation a person finds themselves in. So if it's like really triggering or stressful or triggers even a trauma, then a certain personality or a certain state would take over as a coping mechanism, as a way to deal with that.
Right, and to dial back a little bit, a lot of the literature says that you dissociate when you're going through something really traumatic. So, for example, if you're being raped or in a really, really, really traumatic situation, in order to cope with that trauma, you kind of have to switch off. Right? And that's what they mean by dissociating.
Yes, and it's like an altered state that the person gets into as a way to protect themselves.
Right.
And so it could also be, a situation where someone is really being yelled at. And that's traumatic. That's a trauma. So it doesn't have to always be something as grave as rape, for example. Or it could be even the use of certain words, or a reference to a certain person could trigger
Right. So when someone is triggered, I'm going to make it my job in this episode to ask really stupid questions. So the thing is that
there are no stupid questions.
So the thing is that when someone is triggered and they feel like they need to disassociate from a certain situation or a person or whatever it is it as literal as how a lot of pop culture makes it out to be, where suddenly, like say for example, you are normally Alishiyah, but then something triggers you and then suddenly you've become, I don't know, Priyanka, for instance, suddenly out of nowhere, and you are this completely, as Alishiyah, you're more of an introvert and you are good at drawing, for instance, but suddenly as Priyanka, you are an extrovert and are terrible at drawing, but are suddenly miraculously good at playing an instrument. Does that have any bearing whatsoever?
Well, yeah, I mean, if the person does know how to play an instrument, but that side could come out depending on the situation.
Right.
Or, yeah. So also like someone who has a lot of unresolved issues, right? You go into a way of behaving that is unconscious even to you because it's unresolved. It's in an unconscious realm. So that could be termed as a state that you go into, and you yourself are not even aware that I'm going in, or there's like this default setting or certain pattern behavior that,
So is it almost like a blackout or a stupor of some way, if you're saying that the person's not even aware that they've kind of...
Not a blackout necessarily, but just like I'm on this like autopilot mode or like this default setting mode or like a pattern mode where I'm just going into these repetitive patterns of behavior that could be self-destructive, for example.
Sure, right, okay.
Or going into like a series of like unhealthy relationships or something. And it's like, that's also, one can argue that's also an altered state. It's not a fully aware, conscious state that I'm living my life.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it kind of does. Like, again, I'm still trying to sort of imagine what it would look like in reality. Because, so for example, there was this movie that came out, I think last year. It was by M. Night Shyamalan. It was called Split. It starred James McAvoy in it. And the thing is, the whole point of this particular movie was that James McAvoy's character had, I think, somewhere around 28 different multiple personalities. And each personality had very, very distinct traits that made them extremely different from each other. And all of them were aware of this idea of that the quote-unquote the beast is coming, which was supposed to be the dormant final personality of this particular character. And when finally towards the end, as you're approaching the climax of the movie, this final personality emerges, which is James McAvoy's beast, where suddenly his physical capabilities have suddenly shot up tenfold, and he has more strength than most regular average men because suddenly this beast has been unleashed within him. Again, I'm pretty sure that's rubbish, isn't it?
I think it's definitely an exaggerated version for effect, like in the media.
So diplomatic, yeah.
if you think about it as a coping mechanism, right? You hear all these stories about parents suddenly showing superhuman strength when their kid is like you must have heard those stories where a kid is trapped under the car and suddenly the dad or mom is able to just lift the car because of that shot of adrenaline or whatever that shoots through. Would you call that like a multiple personality disorder thing, or is it just that in that moment you have to cope so badly that something goes through you and you just have to get on with it? And you do.
So like a fight response, a survival response. It's probably a shot of adrenaline in the brain that really takes over. Yeah,
because I think when you have a shot of adrenaline, you automatically, your physical senses are just heightened that much more.
And that's also why, the reason because I guess the literature that I've read about dissociation is to do with rape trauma specifically. And I was thinking about, I've heard of cases where girls have been raped at young ages, and then as they go forward, if they get into a sexual situation, a girl who's normally bright and bubbly, and they get into a sexual situation, completely shut down, completely, because in that moment their flight response or their freeze response actually takes over, right? And they dissociate because of the past trauma. That's also an identity that takes over in that moment to cope. So I'm just to protect.
Can I ask you, Alishiyah, have there been people that you have dealt with on a personal basis that have displayed signs or were actually dealing with dissociative identity disorder?
Yes.
Sure. So what was one that sort of stood out to you?
Yeah, actually, it was one of the most scary cases for me as a therapist. So she was 18, 19, and there was definitely some kind of sexual abuse that had taken place.
Right.
And there was a lot of shame and around even really disclosing all of the details about what exactly happened. It took a long time for her to share that. And so, and apparently it ended up being something to do with her own father, actually.
Okay.
Very disturbing case. He was involved with lots of different women and younger girls and things like that. And so she obviously was suffering with a lot of depression and anxiety and, weight gain. And she couldn't be in certain areas of her home because maybe like the living room, for example, was where she was molested or something. And so she can't even be, so she would like have to isolate herself in her room. And one of the things that media portrays about, people with, so her diagnosis was schizophrenia. And one of the things the media has portrayed is like people with this diagnosis are often very creative, very artistic. And that was the case with her.
Okay.
So she did have amazing, like her drawings and so detailed. And she started creating like these comics. And I would do art with her in the session.
Okay.
And but there was also a dark side. There were a lot of these demonic and devilish drawings. And there was always this thing about this voice telling her that she needs to just kill herself and not be here. And so, I found even like the psychotherapy aspect, the talk therapy, very challenging. Like, like it had to be a combination of consistent therapy and then the medication and that's also a traumatic thing for people, the medication, because there's a lot of this trial and error that happens, right? Like what suits your body, and finding the right dose and the right, also the connection with the psychiatrist.
Yes, correct.
And I was going to say, and she was initially diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Yeah.
But then that diagnosis changed?
It stayed.
Okay.
It did stay.
But then
along with anxiety, depression, social anxiety, generalized anxiety.
Okay. So the hallmarks of schizophrenia are there has to be the presence of delusions and hallucinations. So how did that manifest in her?
Right. So the delusions were these voices that she was hearing constantly, these messages that you'd be better off dead. So that was persistent.
Right.
She did finally, with the medicine, it did calm down. Hallucinations, it was more of where she could feel the presence of some kind of energy. So hallucinations can be visual or they could be also be sensory, where she would just feel like a certain presence always like behind her shoulder.
Right.
And that could also be, reminiscent of the trauma from back in the day.
Yeah.
The oppression that she felt, physical oppression or emotional oppression by her dad.
Yeah.
Right.
That's manifesting in that kind of hallucination.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting that the label of schizophrenia kind of stayed.
In fact, to that end, I actually wanted to ask now, because this is, how people very colloquially use, that person's so schizophrenic. So what is the difference really between dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia?
So with dissociative, there aren't necessarily like hallucinations or delusions even.
Okay.
But with schizophrenia, that is definitely like a core feature of that.
And in schizophrenia, you also disassociate in certain situations or with certain people?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So they're similar, except with schizophrenia, you have the added thing of hallucinations and that sort of thing. Okay, I see. So, all right.
Which could then lead to dissociation, which is why you hear that common trope, which is actually a myth, right? That everyone with schizophrenia is really dangerous and they're going to end up killing someone because of the voice in their head that's like, you need to kill this baby or you need to kill this thing. And then they become that killer in that moment. They dissociate.
So how true is that? Because a lot of what happens, especially with pop culture, is that any character who's portrayed as having a multiple personality disorder or as having schizophrenia is deemed dangerous, just like James McAvoy. There's this ominous undertone throughout the entire thing of the beast is coming, the beast is coming. And even when, the beast is shot, like he is actually shot, he doesn't die because suddenly the beast has appeared. So that's, as you said, exaggerated. But
so the thing that they are dangerous.
Yes.
And so it's also like kind of expanding that statement, dangerous. It's like you can also be dangerous to yourself.
Yes, correct.
And that definitely, I was reading a statistic just the other day actually that I think it's based from like the American Psychiatric Association, APA, that 1 to 3% of people with schizophrenia do commit suicide, and it's like a successful attempt.
Right.
So it must be so hard to live with those voices in your head that everyone is telling you aren't real. Your reality is not.
And also the person, is ridden with so much fear.
Right.
Like it's like at some point, it's like, can I even trust myself?
Yeah, sure.
I may not want to kill or do that, and then even entertaining the thought or that feeling that comes can feel very risky or dangerous. And there's that aspect of the impulse control. Do I have a sense of control?
So with that in mind, are people who have these sort of diagnoses actually fine? They may most likely be a danger to themselves, but are they generally is it fair for them to generally be branded as homicidal?
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's my problem with pop culture, is that as soon as someone's schizophrenic, that means they could possibly kill me in an instant.
So actually, I wrote down this note about that film, A Beautiful Mind.
Okay, yes.
Remember that one with Russell Crowe? You haven't seen?
I saw it a long time ago, though.
So, his personality, if you remember the film, was very gentle and, very like creative again. And yes, he did. He was eccentric. Like, he would write all these mathematical formulas like all across his room and everything. He did have some anger outbursts, but he was not portrayed as like homicidal. And that was based on a true story.
Right.
So having this aspect of like being a genius.
And he was diagnosed with schizophrenia?
Yeah, that was his diagnosis. And they also show the whole relationship, between him and his wife.
Right.
And I think that's very important to bring in these relational aspects.
Sure.
How challenging it can be for the partner of someone with a mental health diagnosis, and how much love and care is actually the main sort of medicine.
Of course,
that's
yes.
the most important.
And also how possible it is to even have... that it is possible to actually function in a way that would work. Have a relationship, have a job. It's not always that you're going to be dysfunctional throughout.
So to that end, when it comes to treatment of these sort of more severe illnesses, I'm guessing medication is of course required, which is worryingly also based on a lot of trial and error. But then alongside that, what are some of the treatments that people normally have? Say if someone has schizophrenia, what sort of things apart from medication do they typically do?
So again, being in consistent either individual or group therapy or both, having your own support systems at home, supportive family, also people with this diagnosis, it's not like, they can't have friends or anything that, so having those things in place.
Right.
I think those are
the main things.
In Finland, in fact, I don't know if you've read or heard about this treatment. I think it's called Hearing Voices.
Okay.
And it is a therapeutic setting where they call in the client and the client's support system, so family and friends and doctors, whoever they deal with. And once a week they have these sessions wherein they invite the voices that are going on inside the client's head to come out, and for the client to just bring them out, and then everyone has a conversation with these voices present, because it invites that client's reality into another reality. And they have had such great success with that treatment that I'm just wondering how to bring it here at some point, or across the world even, because that seems to help. And it's not like they say no to medication. They work along with the medication, with your family, and they say, actually, the environment has to adapt to this person.
Right.
This person cannot adapt to that environment.
Right.
I just found it really amazing work.
Yeah. I think it's really great to hear something like this. And what I have found is that there has to be a certain level of openness and willingness, and to be able to, put the fear aside that, I'm exposing myself. Because, it's great if people are willing and open to that kind, and that can be a challenge for sure. Not everyone feels like strong enough to it's very vulnerable also being in group therapy. But it's great to hear that stuff like this is happening. And
but I think it's unfortunate, because I think with illnesses like schizophrenia or DID, I think those are the illnesses in most people's minds that epitomizes the idea of being absolutely crazy. And
bipolar. Which we haven't really come to.
Which we'll get to. I think, considering what we're talking about, we will probably we'll probably discuss this in another episode as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm still fascinated. Like I want to kind of go back just one more time to dissociative identity disorder, and just kind of really because
Zain's been bringing this up for the last year and a half.
yeah. I mean, the things that I am fascinated, but I'm also concerned because the things that, so now if I am, say, who I am right now, speaking the way I'm speaking, but I am faced with something that, based off, something that happened to me in the past, triggers something so immense that I could, I'm basically sort of either switching off or I'm just taking on a completely different new role. It's not like I'm forgetting who I am, is it? It's not like I've forgotten who I am, or it's not as if my short-term memory has been cut off or anything like that. Is it as extreme as that sometimes?
Yes, it can be.
Okay,
yeah,
it can.
There's this whole other person or personality and behaviors, speech, voice changes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah,
and the person just in that initial moment of trauma just sort of seeks out that sort of escape from that situation. That's how it's
I think
formed?
it just sort of happens.
Right.
It's just a switch that flips, and
wow.
Yeah, there's no sort of thinking about it.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
It's just you're in that switch happens.
Right. And I think as a final thing, I just wanted to kind of ask, this will be my last question, I think, at least for this one. So I know you mentioned stuff about, everyone having support systems, which is the most important thing. But practically speaking, what sort of things do people with schizophrenia or DID do apart from medication? Like what sort of, think of it as, I guess, physiotherapy or sorts. Like, there's a certain sort of exercise that you may do for a certain part of your body to get better.
Yeah.
What sort of quote-unquote exercises do these people do?
Yeah, I think that what I've seen of people with this diagnosis, like they seek out their own, it's called extra therapeutic factors,
Okay.
your own resources in a way. And so it's like listening to music,
Right.
drawing, painting.
Right.
For some people, it's important to be grounded in the body. So doing something like yoga, something physical, or
Right.
even being able to jog or run or something.
Right.
Being connected to the body is important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Working with the hands maybe. Like I know someone who actually did pursue gardening and that kind of thing.
Interesting. Okay.
I actually wanted to say something, just to backtrack a little bit as well. But when Zain, you were asking about, do you just become a different person in that moment? And Alishiyah said, yeah, sometimes that does happen without thinking.
Yeah.
And again, do you think, Alishiyah, it's possible that sometimes when you go through a trauma, your identity is still being formed? And when you go through something so traumatic, you don't have a sense of self yet. And so when you are re-triggered later, you don't have that sense of self to hold on to or to go back to in the first place, which is why you are able to fragment so quickly and without thinking, like we said.
So the identity, exactly what you said, is fragmented.
Yeah.
And therapy, the goal of therapy would be to move from fragmentation to integration.
Right.
All these different parts and personalities are able to dialogue with each other, communicate with each other, and
Okay.
become one sort of concentrated whole.
Yeah.
And that happens over a period of years.
Yes. It teaches a person to cope with the
But
situation.
it does happen. That integration definitely does happen. So there
Fantastic.
is hope.
Yeah,
There is hope.
and similarly, I guess in the next episode we'll talk about borderline personality.
Yes. I think there's
Disorder.
still quite a few things I'm sure we need to cover,
Yeah.
which is why I'm glad we're doing another episode. Unfortunately, this is all we have time for this one.
Yeah.
But we will be back with
quick.
with Alishiyah very soon for another episode to myth bust on a few other things. And thank you everyone for listening to this episode. Please feel free to write in if you have any questions or concerns or anything you'd like us to talk about. You can reach us at write2marbles@gmail.com. The 2 is TO, so write2marbles@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I've been Zain.
I'm Avanti.
And Alishiyah signing
you.
off.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vishal Gondal, an entrepreneur. I've had the chance to meet and understand how some of the super achievers have hacked their way to success, and they have done spectacular innovations. Now I take a closer look at these people's lives to find out what lies beneath the force, only on the Vishal Gondal Show. Episodes out fortnightly on Wednesdays on the IVM website, app, or your favorite podcasting platform.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to listen to attempt number 15 to record the promo for the podcast Vartalab.
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 All day, all night, Vartalab.
Oh yeah. It's a really nice podcast, guys. It's with me and Naveen, and it has really nice stories.
Yeah, people come tell their stories, ups and downs, fun times. We all cry at the end. It's like a Karan Johar movie, but in 1 hour or less.
Hey.
Yeah, every Monday. Yeah.
It's got humor.